So we move on to our next speaker is Aleeza Asad, a dedicated and accomplished debater with over 3 years of debate and public speaking experience. Aleeza has attended many prestigious competitions, including mock trials in both magistrates and Crown Courts, and has won numerous awards. She is an ambassador for Debate Club and often leads debates, tutoring and inspiring younger students to find their voice. Tonight she'll be sharing her talk, Narratives, Noise and Norms.
Good evening. If a child is killed in Gaza and the world just scrolls past it, did that child really exist? We live amidst a deluge of noise, yet paradoxically, we often find that the most urgent truths remain hidden. Not because they magically vanish, but because we've been conditioned into not seeing, not hearing, and not caring. Today, I would like to uncover not just this heartbreaking invisibility, but I'd like to delve into how narratives, norms, and noise all collectively shape our moral conscience, creating a disgusting moral blindness that inevitably determines what it is that we choose to acknowledge and what it is that we choose to ignore. Current silent erosions are quietly but rapidly eating away at our sense of right and wrong. Media bias, censorship, and the normalization of injustice are so slowly dismantling our moral compass. And if we allow this to continue unchecked, then we risk devaluing human life in itself. Firstly, I would like to ponder on narratives. I can almost certainly guarantee that everyone in this room possesses some sort of social media. And so in hearing about the news, it may well naturally become the first form that shapes our perspective. In order to highlight the extensive social media influence, specifically on teenagers, there has been a drastic increase of 22% of Gen Z who admit that they rely on getting their news on apps like TikTok rather than more reliable or trusted resources, according to Pew Research. I believe that this is detrimental. Why, you may ask? Well, by doing so, you willingly fall into the influential manipulation of what others urge you to think rather than the mere truth. The likes of TikTok is based on algorithm. You're fed what's popular, what's allowed, and even worse, what's manipulated. I believe this was highlighted extraordinarily well during the Israel-Hamas conflict, where conflicting and contrasting stories were bounced around, and many few were actually aware of the real story. So at this point you may think, okay, great, I'll switch to watching the news and it'll all be fine. Wrong, because this isn't always the case. Believe it or not, many major news outlets are actually heavily influenced by those who hold political or corporate agendas. And this directly affects what gets shown and how. For example, in the US, Fox News was widely criticized for spreading misleading narratives and favoring conservative politics. Russia Today was accused of acting as a propaganda tool during the Ukraine invasion. And in Israel, Channel 14 is often known for backing government positions and labeling protesters or dissenting voices as radicals. And it's not just what gets reported, it's how. Often news outlets choose their words very carefully. One group becomes freedom fighters, the other terrorists. One group gets headlines and sympathy, the other gets buried or blamed. The glaring hypocrisy and double standards is made clear, yet no one speaks. Conflicts are ignored, and clarity is lost despite open eyes. Now, to show you how easily language can really shape what we feel, imagine two headlines about the same thing. The first one reads, "Hundreds of desperate families arrive in Britain after risking their lives trying to escape the tragedies of war." Now, the second one reads, "Hundreds of illegal immigrants swarm into Britain, overwhelming our resources." The contrast is glaring. These two headlines made you feel and think two completely different things, right? Despite the fact that they were about the same events and same facts. This is how powerful and dangerous language can really be. It shapes what we feel, who we sympathize with, and in the end, who we choose to target or to blame. Next, I'd like to further delve into the influence of the double standards presence, particularly focusing on the noise created for varying conflicts. For example, in 2020, a terrorist attack headlined the French and the Western media, where unfortunately a white schoolteacher was killed. Yet I can almost guarantee that you didn't know that simultaneously there was the Boko Haram massacre, which resulted to the death of over 110 African farmers who were tragically and brutally murdered. Now, this received minimal to no media coverage whatsoever. To be clear, my point is not to decrease the media coverage on the first incident, nor am I trying to excuse any form of violence. Yet, it is made clear here what the media intends to portray more evidently based on geography and race, whilst diminishing the other. The contrast is glaring, and it's painfully evident what the media here is trying to do. The life of one European man dominates global discourse, whilst the lives of over 110 black Africans are seemingly swept aside. This is monstrous, and the callousness is oozing. Now, why the media does so is a matter I myself do not know. Maybe corruption, hatred, money, perhaps it's all of this warped into one big spiral. But what is clear here is how heavily they are all influenced by power. As I stated before, media organizations are impacted by those who hold political, corporate, or economic power, by those who benefit from controlling the narrative. Sensationalism also plays a key role here. Stories that stir fear or outrage generate more clicks, more views, and so more money. And due to this, some noise is amplified, whilst other pleas are silenced. People preach about Ukraine's right to freedom, often labeling Russia as the bad one. Yet Palestine versus Israel is too political. Why is that? Because corporate profits, government alliances, and geopolitical interests are really the deciding factors in what stories get told and how. Power isn't neutral. It shapes everything that we see. So really, is it too political, or have our hearts become blind and not the eyes? Finally, let me turn to norms. They're silent rules of society that shape what we choose to accept as normal and what we choose to question. Many people may define factor X, what makes us human, as empathy, as compassion, and as sympathy. Yet right now, me, you, all of us, are losing that very characteristic that saves us from the risk of dehumanization. All around the world, wars are breaking out, tragedies are increasing, and as a result, so is overexposure. We see, hear, witness more and more heartbreaking situations every single day as our brains are bombarded with an overwhelming flood of information. Violent images, stories of suffering, and relentless cries all around the world. However, as this overall increases, so does the lesson toll on our conscience. We start to hear less, see less, and so care less about it. Now, psychologists call this phenomenon emotional numbing, a mechanism our brain develops in order to shield us from the constant pain that we witness every single day. When trauma or tragedy becomes normal, our emotional responses dull. We don't feel the same shock, sadness, or urgency that we once did. And it's as if our hearts have built up a wall in order to keep the emotional despair at bay. Now, research shows this effect very clearly. A 2018 report published in Frontiers in Psychology reported how repeated exposure to violent media can actually decrease our physiological and emotional responses, essentially turning down the volume on our empathy. Another study by the American Psychological Association explained how this desensitization not only affects our emotional responses, but can also lead to apathy and disengagement. We become observers who no longer act. What does that mean in real life? When the death of another young soul in war becomes just another headline, or worse, just another scroll. Our brains treat it as a background noise. The constant exposure creates a dangerous feedback loop. The more we see, the less we feel. And the less we feel, the less compelled we are to care or to act. And here lies the danger. What happens when this tragedy doesn't just affect us as individuals, but reshapes the very norms of our society? Well, this is our current truth. Empathy, the glue that binds society, is fading. This isn't just a personal tragedy, but a societal one. Emotional numbing fuels indifference towards suffering and enables atrocities to continue unchecked. It's why some conflicts attract global outrage, whilst others disappear into silence. This is a profound crisis, for a world without empathy is a world on the brink of collapse. So I'd like to pose the question again. If a child is killed in Gaza and the world just scrolls past it, without thinking. Did that child really exist? The truth is, they did. But when we swipe away without stopping, without sharing, without questioning, we feed into this cycle of silence and numbness that lets injustice thrive. Now is when action matters most. To address this crisis, we must start by implementing truer narratives, heightening the noise created regardless, and diminishing those impending norms. We can break this cycle. Question headlines, question what is missing, and actively seek out independent, non-profit organisations such as Al Jazeera, Democracy Now! And the New Humanitarian, who are less driven by corporate or political agendas. Support journalism that centres truth over profit. And when you have conversations, don't shy away from uncomfortable topics, because it's only when you talk about these things that you shake others awake too. Change doesn't just come from ignoring the pain. It only happens when we choose to feel, to care, and to act. Because until we break free from this loop of indifference, those children and our humanity remain invisible. Remember, this issue doesn't just shape the battlefields and the wars we don't see, but it relies on our hearts and our minds. Our timeline overflows with bloodshed. Our world is burning. Yet somehow, most people just swipe.
Thank you very much, Aleeza. That was an excellent speech. During public speaking, I tend to feel better as I go along, but watching these three so far, and I feel about my public speaking, I feel like I'm getting worse and you guys are getting better. So really, really well done. That's fantastic.